Tonight, the search is on for the person or people involved in the death of an 18-year-old young woman. She was found shot in the head over the weekend on the Upper West Side. Well, tonight, her friends are talking to Eyewitness News reporter Lindsay Tuckman.
The loss of 18-year-old Kimberly Olmos is a tough one for her friends and family, who describe her as sweet and silly. She loved doing DIY crafts and wanted to go to college. She died Sunday after horrifically being shot in the head.
12 days until she'd board a plane to the Dominican Republic. 12 days until she'd walk the streets her parents had told her about since childhood. 12 days until she'd finally feel connected to her roots. She'd been counting down, crossing off the days. November 14th was circled on her calendar in bright red marker. But Kimberly Olmos would never see November 14th. A 911 call pierces through the quiet night in Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan. Assault in progress at the Harborview Terrace housing complex. Officers race up the stairwell of 520 West 55th Street, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. What they find on that cold concrete landing will shatter a family's dreams and add another name to New York City's growing list of young victims lost to gun violence. An 18-year-old girl, a single gunshot wound to the head, a pool of blood spreading across 3 steps, and a mystery that would force investigators to unravel the final moments of a life full of promise. Her name was Kimberly Olmos, just 18 years old. She was counting down the days to a vacation she'd been dreaming about. She had plans for college. She loved DIY crafts and making people laugh. In 12 days, she would have been on a plane to the Dominican Republic, the homeland of her parents, excited to reconnect with her roots. Instead, her family would be planning a funeral. Tonight, we uncover what happened in that stairwell. Who was with Kimberly in her final moments? Why did no one call for help? And how does an 18-year-old girl with everything to live for end up dead in a public housing stairwell at nearly 1 in the morning? This is the story of Kimberly Olmos. To understand what happened on November 2nd, we need to understand who Kimberly was. Not just another statistic, not just another headline, but a real person with dreams, with a family who loved her, and with a future that was stolen. Kimberly Olmos Javier was born in New York City to parents who had immigrated from the Dominican Republic in search of a better life. She grew up in Morris Heights, a neighborhood in the Bronx, living with her mother, Illy Javier. Like many first-generation Americans, Kimberly straddled 2 worlds, the vibrant Dominican culture of her heritage and the fast-paced reality of growing up in New York City. Those who knew her described her in remarkably similar ways. Her friend Diane Nellis would later say something that perfectly captured Kimberly's essence.
She was amazing. I don't know how to explain it. She was just a delight. Like, you ever been around somebody and you just felt like everything, like your whole room was just filled, like a hole in your heart was just filled? That's exactly how she was. Like, she knew how to make sure to make you laugh. She knew what to say to you.
Kimberly was still in high school, navigating that complicated transition between adolescence and adulthood. She loved doing DIY craft projects, creating things with her hands, expressing herself through art. But more than anything, she was looking forward to November 14th, 2025. That was the date circled on her calendar. That was the day she'd board a plane to the Dominican Republic. She'd been counting down the days with the kind of excitement only an 18-year-old planning their first big trip can have. It wasn't just a vacation. It was a chance to connect with her heritage, to see the places her parents had told her about, to understand where she came from. But November 14th would come and go without her. Let's talk about where this happened. Harborview Terrace is part of the New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA, a public housing complex in Hell's Kitchen. Once known as one of Manhattan's rougher neighborhoods, Hell's Kitchen has undergone significant gentrification in recent decades. Luxury high-rises now stand blocks away from aging public housing projects, creating a stark economic divide. But for all the renovation development, one thing hasn't changed. Gun violence continues to plague New York City's youngest residents. By November 2nd, 2025, Kimberly will become the 25th teenager to die from gun violence in New York City that year alone. 25 teenagers, 25 families destroyed, 25 futures erased. And Kimberly's death would come just hours after another teenager, 16-year-old Tyson Harps, was fatally shot on Brooklyn's Eastern Parkway. 2 teenagers, 1 city, 1 night, both gone forever. So what was Kimberly doing at the Harborview Terrace complex in Hell's Kitchen when she lived in the Bronx? Why was she there at 12:45 in the morning? These are questions her family struggled with, and questions investigators immediately began asking. Her father, Richard Olmos, would later express concerns that had been weighing on him. That simple statement would take on devastating significance, because when police arrived at that stairwell, Kimberly was alone, but evidence would soon suggest she hadn't been alone when the gun went off. The 911 call comes in assault in progress. It's the kind of call NYPD officers in Manhattan respond to far too often, but they never know what they'll find until they arrive. Officers from the Midtown North Precinct arrive at 520 West 55th Street within minutes. They enter the Harborview Terrace complex and make their way to the stairwell. In public housing buildings like this, stairwells are often the site of criminal activity. They're isolated, away from cameras, places where people who shouldn't be in the building can hide. But what officers found wasn't what they expected. Between the second floor landing and the third floor, they discovered Kimberly Olmos. She was lying in a spreading pool of blood, a single gunshot wound to her head. She was still alive, but barely conscious. The scene was immediately secured. EMS was called. Within minutes, paramedics were rushing Kimberly to Mount Sinai Morningside Hospital, just blocks away. Officers began processing the scene, documenting everything, photographing the evidence. And there was one piece of evidence that would prove crucial: a firearm recovered at the scene. This detail is significant. The gun was still there. Whoever had been with Kimberly, if anyone had been with her, hadn't taken a weapon. Or had they? Had someone dropped the gun and fled? Had there been two guns? The presence of that firearm at the scene would drive the initial direction of the investigation. By the time Kimberly arrived at Mount Sinai Morningside, it was too late. At just 18 years old, with her whole life ahead of her, Kimberly Olmos was pronounced dead. Now the investigation shifted from an assault to a homicide. Days after the shooting, the scene remained gruesome. A reporter visiting the building on Sunday evening, 5 days after the incident, found the stairwell still splattered with blood. A large pool remained on the second floor landing. Blood marked 3 steps leading down from the second floor. The physical evidence of violence, still visible, still haunting. For the residents of Harborview Terrace, those stairs became a daily reminder of the tragedy. Every time they walked past, they saw the blood. They remembered the girl who died there. The initial hours of any homicide investigation are critical. Witnesses' memories are fresh. Evidence hasn't been contaminated. The trail is still warm. Detectives began canvassing the building immediately. Had anyone heard anything? Seen anything? According to the 911 call, there was an assault in progress, meaning someone had witnessed something and called it in. But who? They pulled surveillance footage from the building and surrounding area. NYCHA buildings often have cameras at entrances and in common areas. Though coverage can be spotty, detectives would spend hours reviewing footage, looking for anyone entering or leaving the building around the time of the shooting. They examined Kimberly's phone records. Who had she been talking to? Texting with? Where had her phone been in the hours before her death? GPS data could provide a timeline of her movements. They interviewed her family, her friends, her classmates. When did they last see her? Did she mention where she was going? Who she was meeting? And then there was the gun. The firearm recovered at the scene had to be traced. Was it registered? Had it been used in other crimes? Where did it come from? Who owned it? Ballistics analysis would confirm what appeared obvious at the scene. Only one shot had been fired. One bullet, one trigger pull, one life ended. Early in the investigation, detectives explored every possibility. In cases involving young people and guns, there are typical scenarios they have to consider. Was this gang-related? Hell's Kitchen, despite its gentrification, still is gang activity. But nothing in Kimberly's background suggested gang involvement. Was this robbery gone wrong? But Kimberly still had her belongings. Her phone was with her. Nothing appeared to have been taken. Was this a targeted hit? But Kimberly had no known enemies. She wasn't involved in anything that would make her a target. Was this a case of domestic violence? But Kimberly didn't have a boyfriend or partner who would have had access to her that night. And then there was a possibility that investigators initially considered, before quickly ruling it out. Could this have been self-inflicted? In the early days of the investigation, before all evidence had been processed, some officials reportedly believed the gunshot wound might have been self-inflicted. But this theory had problems from the start. First, Kimberly showed no signs of suicidal ideation. She was excited about her upcoming trip. She had plans. She was looking forward to the future. Second, the forensic evidence didn't support it. The angle of the wound, the position of the body, the location of the gun, none of it was consistent with suicide. And third, there was a 911 call about an assault in progress, meaning someone had witnessed something violent happening. As detectives dug deeper, a clearer picture began to emerge. Phone records showed Kimberly had been in contact with someone that evening. Surveillance footage showed her entering the building, but it also showed something else. She wasn't alone. Witness interviews revealed that people in the building had heard arguing. Some had heard what sounded like horseplay or roughhousing in the stairwell shortly before the gunshot. And then came the breakthrough. Detectives developed a theory based on the physical evidence, witness statements, and the timeline of events. It wasn't a robbery. It wasn't a hit. It wasn't suicide. It was an accident, but an accident that someone tried to cover up by fleeing the scene. According to the working theory that detectives developed, Kimberly had been with a friend that night. They were in the stairwell together, possibly heading down from an upper floor. The friend had a gun, possibly showing it off, possibly playing with it. And in a moment of catastrophic carelessness, the gun went off. One shot, one bullet, and Kimberly fell. But instead of staying, instead of calling for help immediately, instead of trying to save her life, the friend panicked. They ran. They fled the building with the weapon. Wait, no. The gun was found at the scene. So they must have dropped it in their panic and fled anyway. Or had there been two guns? The forensic picture was still incomplete. The 911 call about an assault in progress now made sense. Someone, maybe another resident, had heard the gunshot, heard the commotion, and called police. But by the time officers arrived, Kimberly was alone, dying in that stairwell, and whoever had been with her was gone. This theory explained everything. The single gunshot, the lack of robbery, the presence of the gun, the fact that Kimberly had no defensive wounds, and most importantly, the absence of anyone else at the scene when police arrived. But having a theory and proving it are two different things. Detectives now faced a crucial challenge. Identify who had been with Kimberly that night, who was a friend her father had been concerned about, who had access to a gun, and who panicked and ran instead of saving her life. In most true crime stories, this is where we'd reveal the perpetrator's name, show their photo, detail their background, and explain their motive. We'd explore their childhood, their criminal history, their relationship with the victim, and the warning signs everyone missed. But in Kimberly Olmos' case, we can't do that, because as of November 2025, weeks after her death, no arrests have been made. Think about that for a moment. Investigators believe they know what happened. They have a working theory. They've identified gun violence as the cause. They've ruled out suicide. They've determined it was a homicide. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner officially classified Kimberly's death as a murder. Someone else killed her. And yet, the person responsible has not been arrested. Why? What's preventing an arrest? In cases like this, there are several possible explanations. Lack of cooperative witnesses. If the friend who was with Kimberly hasn't come forward, and if witnesses in the building aren't talking, building a prosecutable case becomes extremely difficult. Insufficient forensic evidence. DNA and fingerprints on a gun aren't enough to prove who pulled the trigger, especially if the suspect claims they weren't there or that it was an accident. The suspect is a minor. If the person with Kimberly that night was under 18, there are additional legal complexities and protections that slow the process. The suspect has fled. They may have left New York City, left New York State, or even left the country entirely. Legal threshold for charges. Prosecutors need to be confident they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt not just that someone was there, but that their actions constitute a crime under New York law. This is one of the most frustrating aspects of Kimberly's case. Her family knows she didn't die alone. Investigators believe she didn't die alone. The evidence suggests she didn't die alone. But without an arrest, without someone being held accountable, there can be no trial, no conviction, no justice in the traditional sense. What we do know is this. Whoever was with Kimberly that night made a choice. When that gun went off, they had options. They could have stayed. They could have immediately called 911. They could have tried to stop the bleeding, to save her life. They could have held her hand as she lay dying and told her help was coming. Instead, they chose to run. They chose self-preservation over Kimberly's life. And in doing so, they guaranteed she would die alone on that cold stairwell floor. Someone out there knows what happened. Someone out there was in that stairwell. Someone out there is living with the knowledge that Kimberly Olmos is dead because of them, whether through malice or tragic accident. And someone out there has to live with the fact that they ran. Narration: on Sunday, November 9th, 2025, 1 week after her death. Instead of counting down the days to her vacation in the Dominican Republic, Kimberly Olmos' family gathered to say goodbye. The funeral was held 1 week after that devastating night in the Hell's Kitchen stairwell. Her grandmother, Cheryl Olmos, had posted on Facebook days earlier, her words raw with pain. With deep pain, I announced the death of my oldest granddaughter, Kimberly. She was only 18 years old in the fullness of life. That statement captures the helplessness, the anger, the desperation of watching a child die to gun violence in America. We live where anyone can have a gun, where an 18-year-old can access a firearm, where play with a gun in a stairwell is somehow normal enough that it happens, and where, when it goes wrong, someone can just run away. Kimberly's family faced not just emotional devastation of losing her, but the financial burden of laying her to rest. Family friends Maya Lees and Brianna Rose set up a GoFundMe campaign on behalf of Kimberly's mother, Ili Javier. Their description of Kimberly painted a picture of the young woman the world lost.
Another young soul to gun violence and someone I was actually close with. It's hard at the end of the day because it's my friend.
Turn yourself in. Like, at the end of the day, you did wrong. Like, it's your fault. And, like, you have to suffer the consequences.
And a message for their friend.
The community rallied. Friends, family, even strangers who were moved by her story donated. In death, Kimberly received an outpouring of love. But it's a love she should have been able to feel while alive. The funeral gave her family and friends a chance to say goodbye, to share memories, to cry together. But it didn't give them justice. It didn't give them answers. It didn't give them closure. Because the person who was with Kimberly that night wasn't there. They weren't arrested. They weren't charged. They weren't facing the family whose lives they destroyed. The New York Police Department continues to investigate. They've asked anyone with information about the case to call Crime Stoppers at 800-577-TIPS. All calls are kept confidential. Tips can be submitted anonymously. Someone knows something. Maybe they saw someone leaving the building that night. Maybe they heard someone talking about what happened. Maybe they know someone who suddenly had access to a gun and now doesn't. Maybe they heard someone express guilt or fear. If you know anything about what happened to Kimberly Olmos, the NYPD wants to hear from you. Kimberly became a statistic that night. The 25th teenager killed by gun violence in New York City in 2025. Just hours after 16-year-old Tyson Harps became number 24. By the end of 2025, that number would likely grow. More teenagers, more funerals, more families shattered, more potential unrealized. According to data from the NYPD, gun violence in New York City has fluctuated in recent years, but teen deaths remain disturbingly common. These aren't gang members or career criminals, though their deaths will be tragic too. These are high school students, kids with dreams, first-generation Americans like Kimberly trying to build a future. What makes Kimberly's case particularly haunting is how preventable it was. This wasn't an ambush. This wasn't a planned attack. By all accounts, this was senseless, a gun being handled recklessly, an accidental discharge, a moment of stupidity that cost a young woman her life. And then it was compounded by cowardice, by someone choosing to run rather than face what they'd done, by someone valuing their own freedom over Kimberly's life. Kimberly's family will never get her back. They'll never see her graduate, never see her go to college, never see her start a career, get married, have children. All of those futures, all of those possibilities, died in that stairwell, and the person responsible gets to keep living their life, at least for now. To Kimberly's family, her mother Ili, her father Richard, her grandmother Cheryl, and everyone who loved her, we offer our deepest condolences. Your loss is immeasurable. Kimberly deserves so much more than the brief life she was given. And to whoever was with Kimberly that night, come forward, face what happened, give her family answers, give them the chance at justice. It won't bring her back, but it's the right thing to do. It's the only thing to do. The number again is 800-577-TIPS. Crime Stoppers. Your call can be anonymous. If you found this video meaningful, please take a moment to leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Subscribe to stay informed about updates on this case and others. And if you knew Kimberly, if you have memories of her, please share them. Let the world know who she was beyond the tragedy of how she died. Rest in peace, Kimberly.